You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Elia Sinclair. Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Hello and welcome to this week's show of the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about art, life, and all that jazz. I'm your host, Elia Sinclair, and today we're going to kick off with a segment I call Food for Thought. In honor of April being National Poetry Month, on this week's Food for Thought, I will be reading a poem by Billy Collins. This poem is called Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh birds suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There's just no way that you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head. But you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife, not to mention the crystal goblet, and, somehow, the wine. Today, may you be reminded of the uniqueness you bring to the world, all that you are and all that you're not. May you remember that it's never too late to become who you might have been, to stand up and try again, and drink deeply from the crystal goblet of life.
You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Elia Sinclair, at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Elia Sinclair, and you're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, and all that jazz. Today, I am here with designer, painter, and creative, who also happens to be my wife, Katie Sinclair. Hello, and thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. I even offered to buy Starbucks to sweeten the deal, but she said she didn't need it. She would come anyway. So
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
you for taking time out of your weekend to speak to us.
Of course.
So there's a couple of things I'd like to go into today. One of them is that you, possibly more than anyone else I know, have really sculpted your life around making space for creativity, and not just for yourself, but for other people too. There's a real emphasis on connectivity and community in your creative approach. So I'm interested in your relationship to creativity, how that began, and why you chose to live your adult life this way.
So many things in that question.
I know. I have a bad habit of doing that. I need to limit it probably, but so many people I talk to are so interesting.
Okay, so my history with creativity, kind of how it showed up. It's always been there. I was very lucky to grow up with parents who just encouraged me to do what I wanted to do. So I was the little girl in a frilly skirt fishing, and it was just whatever it was that I was curious about, I got to go and try it and do it, which was a rarer experience than it should be for little girls in the 90s. But getting to enjoy that, it really opened up so many different avenues, and when I'm curious about something, there's a lot of doing something physically that's part of exploring what the thing is. And so that's led to I have many, many mediums that I use. And I don't know how to do it any other way, really. It's just how it's ended up. So, because of, let's see, what was the...
There were several questions in there. I think the heart of the question really is like, a lot of artists I know will kind of forge the creative path so that they can make space for their own art to express themselves. But that's not really what I saw you do. And this kind of goes into my next question, so maybe I'll just bring it in here for context. The summer before the pandemic, you bought a house specifically for the purpose of creating an artist collective, a communal living situation, a collective of people around the idea of creating art. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. That's what the question came from. You were 27, so you were establishing your adult life around this idea of communal creativity.
Right.
And so what kind of prompted that, I guess?
No, the creative expression has always been such a big part of how I've lived my life. But like you're saying, it's always been kind of connected to this with other people element. Like you do it and then you share it, or you do it next to somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it might come slightly from my neurodivergence, right? I body double with people as somebody with ADHD, and that's when I feel the most comfortable and the most creative and just
Does it help you stay
flow.
Focused?
Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's it, sometimes it's other elements, but so much of what my curiosity lends to is what brought about this art to be made. So like if I go to a museum, I love seeing the art, but I find the art to be so much more interesting when I know some of that backstory.
Yeah.
Like, there's always that question of like, can you separate the artist from the art? And that you can, but there's also this whole second layer of, why did they make this? Why is this piece different from their previous piece? Like, if there's a shift or a change, or like, what does their artwork look like on a timeline through the decades? And that kind of pulling those pieces together, kind of like history plus art as an element, like time being an element in an artist's life and creative arc. I find that particular element so fascinating. And so because of that, of course I want to see that art being made. Like, it's kind of like getting a front seat to what I only get to see decades later at a museum. I was also, at the time, very, very single. And
I was one of the original artists at this collective.
Yes. Yeah. Ellie was one of the original. And so there was in many ways, our country and our society is not set up for single people.
Yeah.
There's some benefits, but there's also a lot of, what's it going to look like when I'm 80?
Yeah.
What does community look like in this country when you get old? Is there any kind of safety there? And it's also, even before that, it was just very difficult for me to build a community in general. And I've been trying for years and years, my entire adult life, to like build up, like, these are the people that I see. This is my third space. These are, these are the connections that I have. But our culture isn't very good at that.
Yeah.
And so I was really intentional about, like, all right, I want that to be part of my life. And I want, a community around me that we have those touch points. We have that connection. There are people I can go to. There are people who will come to me. And so, just what if I did it in a house?
Yeah.
Not only would I get that back door view of other people's creativity, and I think a lot of people don't think they're very creative until they're told, no, but like what you're doing is so interesting. It might be popsicle sticks and marshmallows, but like what's behind that? Like why popsicle sticks and marshmallows, and why are you using these forms, or whatever it is. I think a lot of us artists have a lot of doubt around the importance or even like legitimacy of our art until somebody else is like, oh, but like why? just being so curious about it. And I tend to bring a lot of that curiosity to the table, and so it's a benefit for both people, right? I get to enjoy them experiencing their art in a new way, and they get to enjoy somebody actually witnessing it.
I will say you're extraordinarily good at that. Like, there's like nothing you won't allow. Like creatively, you don't really have a scale of like, this is better than this. It's like you said, if someone were to make something out of literal, whatever it is, marshmallows and popsicle sticks, you would take it with the same seriousness and gravitas as, a classical oil painting or something like that. And I think that that's really special for artists of all types. And I can say, as someone who lived in that house, in that collective, that it was tremendously freeing, because the whole house was that way. It was suddenly like, oh, this is a place where creativity of all types is celebrated, whatever the medium, however you're feeling, however it's coming about. And we would have monthly meetings where we would all get together and discuss what we were working on, what worked and what didn't, our triumphs and joys and frustrations, etc. And it was just a place of tremendous creative facilitation.
Yeah. It's also very hard.
Yeah.
To live in a community like that. All kinds of, I think we all dream of that kind of space. And communal living, I don't know any of my friends who haven't been like, what if we just moved into the woods, made a commune, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a common dream, but at the same time, like, actually doing it, I and the people who started it, we knew that would be a big part of the work.
Yeah.
And I think that was the key factor of really entering into that, was up front being like, this is going to be hard. And it's going to be hard not just in paying rent and, doing all that like stuff you do in a house, but it's also that communal living aspect. Is just when you're that close to people, it's a lot. You have to deal with them like you deal with your family.
Yeah.
And, we're all kind of used to that family relationship, but then you have to build those same kinds of boundaries. And
it was interesting figuring out the line between individuality and collective, because no one wanted to stomp on anybody else's individuality, but there was a certain point where participation was necessary for the thing to fly, right? Like, if you weren't going to participate, then we were just four roommates.
Right. What are you doing?
And we're not a collective, right? So I, again, was there, and it is not a collective now. Now it is our house as a couple. And, our relationship was like a part of that like, I was there through that whole process, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, we both witnessed this process together. But how, having that collective and having that sort of communal creativity in also a living situation, and then now our house is still a very creative place that we're still trying to foster creativity in.
Yes.
But what has the collective experience kind of taught you or changed in regards to how you do that now?
I mean, I am very proud because the collective ended in a healthy way. It wasn't just an explosion, which is often what I hear other people who have tried to do that. But we also came in with a very specific, like, this is how you come in and this is how you leave. That was always part of the rhythm that was set out from the beginning for that collective.
Right.
And so for anyone who wants to do something like that, like, make sure that's part of it. I think that was the biggest thing that I learned that really went and worked, was like, make sure everyone has an out, because it's an intense experience. It was amazing, but it's also an intense experience, and you want everyone to be able to know clearly what it looks like to say, you know what, I think I'm done. Like, this was great for that season, and now I'm done.
Right.
But now what it looks like is it is the same house, as you said, but rather than everyone living there together, currently it looks like we have a monthly meetup where we and other artists in the area all get together and just kind of check in, see how everyone's doing. We eat some good cookies or whatever snacks, right?
It's essentially that, well, it is that same meeting we had as a collective. We decided, what if we opened this up to creatives that are not in the house? Because at the moment, that's you and I.
Exactly.
And, like, did the same thing, but for more people.
And a huge part of the benefit of the collective was shared resources, which of course was like part of why I started it, right? Like, well, if you have a sewing machine, I don't have a sewing machine, but now I have access to a sewing machine. And so some of that element has still remained. Like, we know who has what, and, that kind of, it just kind of facilitates those open communication to share those resources. It creates a relationship structure with which to do that.
Yeah.
So we'll, eat cookies, snacks, whatever, chat about what life is. Oh, was your birthday? How'd it go? Whatever it is, you kind of have those touch points. And many of these people at this point we've known for years. And so it's just continuing those relationships. And then watching them get to know each other has been such a joy for me, too. I'm always really excited when our friends get together without us, because it's like, oh, they're friends now.
We connected them.
But then each meeting is also like a big art question, kind of like your beginnings that you do on this show. It's like, here's this big
creative
idea question. Sometimes it's from something somebody said the last discussion. Sometimes it's just something that you and I have been like, wow, what about this? And we have this long, we should talk about this at Scribblers, which is what we're calling the group, the collective now. But it's creativity is, in my experience, so much a part of the human experience when things are balanced. It's so easy. It can be one of the first things to fall away when life gets hard, because it doesn't demand your attention in order to survive. Right?
Yeah.
But that mental wellness, I think it definitely does provide some of that.
Yeah.
And so even just having a space to talk through things that we're all thinking about, somebody comes up with something in the discussion, you're like, oh, I thought I was the only one who thought about that. I thought I was the only one who struggled with that. I thought I was the only one who had that weird proclivity, and so even just that element, even if none of us ever made art inspired by these discussions, just being in the same space with other people who have the same hopes for their own creativity or habits, or even just desire to express themselves through a physical medium. Because that's really kind of the only definition we've put on an art for that group.
I was going to say, like, one of the things that's inspiring to me is the not versatility, but diversity.
There's so many.
Of creative expression in this group of people, and how, like you were saying, different, there are different challenges and this and that, but there's so many of the same questions and obstacles come up regardless of the medium,
Yes. Yeah, we have, somebody who does little guitar on the side. We have somebody who their whole career, well, the props manager, you had Hannah on.
We've got a jeweler and ceramicists and musicians and writers.
Digital artists. We have welders. We have sculptors. We have people who make sculptures out of what would be considered just trash. Like, it's just so interesting. And yeah, all of those people end up with the same kind of questions, the same things that they're dealing with, the same kinds of obstacles that come up between them and feeling comfortable creating. So it's just, it's very helpful just to have people to talk to about the weird stuff you think about. Because it's not weird. It's just
community,
human existence.
Yeah. Indeed so. So I would love to switch gears a little bit and talk about your work as a designer. As you mentioned earlier, you have a lot of mediums that you use for creative expression. You have a very gifted natural eye for color and design, and that has often been expressed in your painting. But you're really good at design of all kinds. When I say our house is a creative space, it is both energetically and physically. It's like, it's beautiful because, like, you have made it so with the designer's eye. But your bread and butter right now is you are a landscape designer and a horticulturist. So I would love to hear about that work and taking your creativity and your kind of natural knack for design into a professional space?
Well, it's been great fun. Yeah, I work with an amazing team is a big part of why it works.
Yeah.
The company that I'm part of as the lead designer also has, a senior designer, and we have, an amazing build crew, and we have somebody working with the build crew. Now I have an amazing maintenance manager, and then they manage all the maintenance people. So after we're done, they're the ones who take care of the space as it continues to grow and shift and change, right?
Yeah.
So really, I get to go in and just say, okay, here's the measurements of the space for this new garden. This is what these people want. And then, the kind of functions they want for their space, things they're really hoping for. And then I just get to play and be like, okay, well, I think a big part of my design for their space has to do with I tend to be really aware of like the physical experience of a space.
Yeah. Yes.
So when I enter in, it's like, I will feel physical sensations if it's like that ceiling is really low or this sofa is in the wrong place. Like I can kind of, I don't know how to describe why I know it's wrong, but like it just feels physically odd, whether it's the flow of the space or whatever it is. And so
feng shui.
Yeah,
a little bit maybe.
It's not. I don't practice feng shui, and that I don't know all of those amazing details. That's a whole discipline in practice, right? I would be really curious to have a feng shui person go through my designs because
that would be cool.
Just to see like, is there any correlation here? Like, what does that look like?
Or like through our house.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But I would not say that I do feng shui.
Right.
Because of
I'm in it more kind of like a catch-all term for catching the energy of space.
Right, exactly. But yeah, then I get to just, I think so much of it is just kind of closing my eyes and like sitting myself in the physical spaces that I'm drawing out on the paper. And I'm like, what would this feel like? Where does it need more protection? Where does it want, And it all depends on how, how much I was able to tell. How much do they want privacy? How much do they want to be like cuddled up in a space? How much do they want to like see a vista, right? So every single design has so many elements in it that just kind of makes a very obvious answer to my brain, because it's like, well, it has to be like this because this is what they were looking for and this is what they wanted, right? And this is there's also an element of my style in it.
Yeah, I was going to say because I know that there has been some frustration sometimes when like their brief and your creative vision clash a little bit.
Oh yeah, there's always, I usually will do 3 designs. One that is kind of exactly what they asked for. The next one, which is like that, but better. Like what if you stretched it further? And then a third one, which is kind of a curveball. Like, all right, if we just kind of put some of this down, right, you're still going to have these functions in the space. But what if I just kind of flipped it on its head? Because that can be really helpful for people to look through. Be like, oh, okay, I actually had never thought of that. Because they've been in this space so much. Sometimes it's hard to kind of break out of that.
Yeah.
You've always thought, well, of course the table's going to be here because the table has to be there because the table has always been there.
Right.
Like, well, what if we put it on this completely other corner? Like just kind of throwing stuff around
out there.
And I really love that process. It also means that the final design can be completely different from what I had imagined.
Right.
And maybe even from what I would have chosen for them. But the important part is that I still think that it is a solid design. So there is an element of like, all right, well, if you want that there, we're going to make it a heavier weight, right? It's going to be a bigger beam to kind of balance out, whatever it is that kind of change the line weights of the space or change what material it's made out of in order to keep that cohesion in the whole space.
Yeah.
So some of those I definitely still get to kind of move and shift those. And of course they have to confirm that they like it.
Right.
At the end. But the goal is to kind of find that space where they know they're getting what they wanted, and also it's a cohesive space put together for them.
Yeah. I'm really curious about what it's like working with a living medium. Because I can't really think of any other, I'm sure there probably are, but like creative outlets where you're working with something that is alive. Like it is going to have a blooming season. It is going to die. Yeah, plants. And so how do you even go about, because it's going to change color, right? Like when, different plants have different ways of expressing their living and dying. I'm trying to find it. They're going to change color, basically.
Yeah, there's seasons of rest and there's seasons of
So
growth.
you've got to think about that when you're designing. So what's that like as opposed to working with paint or yarn or something that isn't
well, I love it, obviously, as I have very specifically made it my career, because I went into plants first before I went into landscape design.
Yes.
And so I did maintenance for a really long time. And I will tell you that makes everything so much easier.
Knowing the plants.
Knowing
really
the
well.
plants.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like putting together a dinner party.
Oh, tell me more.
Right?
Yeah.
So you as the host, right? You're going to bring people over. You kind of know what they tend to talk about. Or maybe you know two friends that like really have some similar interests. So you sit them next to each other because you know they're going to have the best time, right? Or maybe there's two people and you're like, ooh, they could actually like, maybe they don't get along super well, but like that would be really interesting because of the contrast, right? So I think of plants in a very similar way.
Yeah.
And I tend to anthropomorphize them a lot in my design or in, when I'm thinking through it or potentially when, particularly when I'm doing maintenance.
So that they have personalities to you?
Oh,
like,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Each of them. Because some of them are a lot more delicate. Sometimes they're, like, really picky about when they get pruned. Sometimes they, are going to stretch out in this very particular way. But also specifically having year over year experience of these types of plants outside in a garden and seeing them month after month during my maintenance career. Yeah. And, that continues now, right? Because I'm still seeing them all the time. But you just kind of get to know how they move and they stretch, how they rest and they revive, how all that looks. I tend to work with just perennials, which are ones that come all the way back every single year until they get too old to do so. And rather than you have to replant them every year, you want to have that like bone structure of plants that are just going to be there for you and be ready for you.
So it basically comes down to just knowing them really well.
Yeah, it's a lot of information in one's head. It's like knowing 600 people and knowing what they like to do at each time of year. Yeah. And knowing at least two names because they've got a Latin name if they've got an English name.
Yes, that too. I don't know how you do that. I mean, I guess it's just repetition is how we all learn anything. But you do, I'm realizing you do anthropomorphize plants because sometimes we'll just be on a walk or that time we saw two young trees in the back of a truck with a wood chipper and they were driving down and they were kind of blowing in the wind. Like, did you see those two little trees? They were like, no.
They're terrifying.
They were so scared. And I'm like, how did you know they were scared? You're like, you see them going, ah.
Because they were getting whipped by the wind. You could just see their little hair flip back. Because they don't know if they're going to go in the chipper. I mean, I imagine they were the replacement for whatever was going to be chipped when they got where they were going.
Probably.
Right. But they don't know that. They don't know that? Yeah.
Or like we were on a walk the other day and I was noticing an interesting like patch on a tree and you're like, oh, that's a wound from when it was young. And I was like, no, now I'm so sad. It was just this cool.
It persevered though. There's so much of that can be a lovely thing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of anthropomorphizing, but I think a lot of that is because partially, I imagine there are other people with this too, but I think much of it comes from my neurodivergence and that kind of like physically feeling things that I'm seeing. So, particular plants have a particular flow to them or they have a particular texture.
Yeah.
And you can immediately, like, it'll kind of poke me in the eye if something is not quite matching that.
Yeah.
And so, when you're pruning a tree, it's really like, oh, okay, where does it look uncomfortable, right? That's where its branches are crossing and rubbing on each other. Or maybe one branch is coming from the outside and going through the inside. Like, that's just going to wreak havoc later. And so that's what you remove, right? And so it's kind of going through and allowing that. And once you've gone through that process, you can really see, it's so much more comfortable.
Yeah.
It's like how it goes into my brain.
Yeah. And then someone like me, like I would notice if a space was nice. I'd be like, oh, this is nice. And I would have no idea how to fix it if something were wrong or what was even wrong.
Right.
I mean, you do that in our house all the time. I'll be like, what's wrong with you? And you're like, it's hurting my brain, and you'll move things until they're just so. And then when you make it better, I'm like, oh, that is better. But I never noticed it was like not, like energetic, like what you're talking about, like that sort of ethereal sense of aggravation.
And the really interesting thing is I've been doing a lot of garden coaching lately. So even like that living room, like I usually don't know why it's better. Sometimes it's just like, I need a change. And then it's like, oh, this does feel better. Sometimes it doesn't, and I'll put it back, right? But
sometimes she's like, I'm feeling itchy. I'm like, oh, Lord. What's going to change?
Something's going to move.
Something's going to get painted or changed.
Wash your toes at night. But yeah, it's been so interesting having to really work through the discipline of describing why something works. Because now I'm doing garden coaching, and so I'm out with people in their gardens, and I'm just like trying to I can't just prune the camellia to look comfortable, right?
You got to explain.
I have to explain to them why this thing and why that works and why this feels better. And so I've really enjoyed that kind of discipline of learning how to articulate. And it's nice because it usually comes about, one plant at a time, because we usually have one big kind of project we take on in each coaching session. But
how have you done that? Like, because you have to sort of self-reflect and figure out why it works or not.
For me, it's a lot. I was a special ed teacher before. I switched to gardening. And it's a lot like teaching math. Like, I don't really understand why this works, but neither of us do right now. Aww. So here's how I've figured out how to use it, right? Math has never worked in my brain.
Right.
But because of that, I've ended up being a very good math tutor. Because it's like, okay, the way that they described it before doesn't make sense to you. It didn't make sense to me either, right? So let's find out the way to best describe it so that it works in your brain.
Yeah.
So a lot of those coaching sessions are like, let me try saying it this way. Let me try saying it this way. Can I tell you how I see it and feel it in my body? And that has made a huge difference. And I think it's also made it a lot easier for the people that I'm coaching to then take that same knowledge and translate it to a different plant or to a different space.
Yeah.
Or to, and so that's been really interesting. I would need to ask them more directly than I have in the past. So is this helpful? Right? But they keep on booking me. So okay, yeah. This seems to be going great. Like, it seems to be working out. But yeah, it's for me, it's a very tactile experience. Rather than just a knowledge experience, which means that you can take it and translate it to all of these different spaces as well. Yeah,
that's so cool. I'm endlessly fascinated by your approach to creativity and the things you're able to do as a result, because our approaches are very different. Like, yes. your approach to art and creativity it seems to be more about comfort and about nurture and about community, and that creativity and art is meant to be something in service of the artist. Whereas my experience with art and creativity has been very violent and volatile and toxic, and
it grabs you by the throat.
It grabs me by the throat and jerks me around, and then I start fighting back, and it's like, yeah, it's like just being in a fight to the death with a toxic lover that you can't stay away from. And that's really interesting to me.
That has not been my experience
at all. I know. And so, and being in the collective and realizing that it is quieter and less violent for other artists too. I don't know why I'm like that. I don't know if it's a personality thing, nature versus nurture, if it's a philosophical approach, or what, but it has been really, when I come to you with just a very frustrating creative problem, which happens a lot, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to kick this thing into the sun. You always have such a balanced, like helpful approach that has to do with like you never say this, but it's essentially like, have you considered not strangling it to death? It's just less violent. I'm not sure what the question in there is, other than like how.
I mean, I have a thought.
Yes,
right? Because I also feel like there are a lot of artists who have that experience, and who have that more volatile, like, or like art feels like something that happens to them rather than something that they can do for themselves, and therefore, create this thing to serve them or even their community, right? But so I think it's important for that to be acknowledged, right? Like,
Appreciate
you're not the only
Thanks.
one with
I
this
know that,
experience,
but
right?
still.
I know you know that, but for the listeners out there, but what I'm so curious about is that at what point does it go to, where do those two intersect, right? Is it just that is how creativity shows up for you, and so it's about ways of finding your own boundaries in it? Or is it okay, well, what if I take on more of this philosophy and start using it, right? Where does that where is that happy medium place, or are they two parallel lines? Is there a place? Because there's also definitely a place where I can be so wrapped up in other people's creative journey that I stop doing my own.
Yeah.
Right? Which is not really, it's not my favorite place to be either.
Yeah.
Though it is very comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to take any risk right now. I just get to be so excited about what you're doing, and I don't have to worry about all those oil paintings that are in the hallway that I haven't finished because I'm scared to do them. I'm scared for them to not be as perfect as I want them to be. But in large part for me, my creative life, the one that's for me and not for money or for other people, is largely, whether it's like a community mural or something like that, like that's for other people. But for the stuff that's for me, is I've used it so much as like an actual practice for therapy. Like I am making this and it is uncomfortable, but the point is that it's not going to be perfect because everything in my body is screaming that it has to be perfect. Yeah. It's never going to be perfect if I don't start it either.
Right. Yeah, it just will never exist.
Right.
Which is sadder.
And then there's been so much art that I've made that I work on it for so long, and then it's like, oh man, this is like almost perfect. And then it looks really weird. Like it looks too perfect. And I'm like, dang it. Like, right. So it's finding that space of like, there needs to be mess. Right. Yeah. And I think so much of that is because the world is messy. If everything, there's nothing in the world that is perfect. And so a perfect piece of art isn't actually
be abnormal.
Perfect. Yeah. It has to have something odd in it, much like every person.
Oh, that's a whole lot we can talk about there. But you said something in Scribblers, our group, a couple months ago about you will intentionally not ruin it, but you'll intentionally like make something imperfect in the painting. So like, oh, I ruined it now.
In the beginning.
Right. So you can destroy that sense of perfectionism right from the get-go. It's like, it's no longer perfect. So, what do I got to do? I just got to keep going. Right. And I think that's so metal.
All I can do is get better from here.
Yeah. Like to take control of that in that way, to do it on purpose. I just love that. And I think that it's a very smart way to work around that mental block.
Yeah, it'll torture me the whole time.
Oh my gosh. Are you comfortable discussing the rage that often comes up in your painting? I think it's very typical of a lot of creatives, and I run into it too, when it's just like, this isn't what I want it to be, and I am mad.
Yes. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yes. Yeah, for those of you listening, I often get I have a really hard, especially when I'm like going through and I've been working on a piece for a while, and I just kind of get mad. And it has been something I have been trying to figure out how to deal with it for a long time. And it's, part of the therapy element. And Ellie's gotten very good at being like, maybe you should stop now, like take a break or eat some food, or all of those are really great options, right?
Yeah.
Stop, take some food.
Take a breather.
Go for a walk. But I don't know. It's something I've been working through. There's a lot of things. I'm now very good at telling other people how to get through that.
Yeah, you're, again, very good at holding space for other people. Not so
Right?
good for yourself.
Not so good for myself. So it's like, oh yes, I absolutely have this experience. This is how it goes. Here's what I do. You know, so often it's just constantly repeating those same things that I would tell somebody else.
Yeah. Self-advice.
Right. Like, stop, you know. That oil paint is going to be wet for a month, so you can stop for 2 hours until you're ready to keep going. Or even just walking away from a piece and coming back and looking at it again. It's like, oh, actually, that's kind of cute, you know, or that's really interesting. Or here's the part about it that I really like that I don't want to change.
It's really hard to navigate as the observer of this process because you'll be so been out of shape about stuff. And I don't know what it was supposed to be in your head, because to my eye, it's like, this is amazing. Like, what's the problem? But I don't want to be like, you know, what's the problem? Like, disregard your feeling. But you know, it's like, girl.
Yeah, right.
I don't think you're seeing the masterpiece you just created.
Also, it's not that important. You know,
like the world won't break if it's not.
If it's not exactly what you wanted. I mean, some artists, very famous ones, we can tell through, you know, scientific paint dating or whatever that they worked on them for years at a time. Yeah. And sometimes there'd be a huge break and then they'd do some more, you know.
That's a good reminder.
Sometimes it was to paint out their ex, but sometimes, you know, it was
before Photoshop. You had to spend a year painting them.
Well, I don't love her anymore. Let's make sure that face is different. Like, we've seen that too, which is, you know.
Just crop that out for a year.
Exactly. But it's also just like, sometimes there'll be this one particular part of the painting and they just try and do it over and over and over and over.
Get that perfection.
So this is, you know, we know this is an experience also that many people have through history. And I don't know. I mean, I think so much of the thing that most often gets me through the bump is like when I'm at a museum, right? There's all these amazing paintings on the wall. And I look at those paintings and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then I just flip it around and I'm like, if that painting was sitting on my easel at my house, would I be satisfied with it?
What I think, yeah.
Usually the answer is no. And it's like, I really need to think about that. Right?
Shots fired.
So
yeah,
that's a huge one. It's like, here is a piece that has so much public proclaim to the point that it is in a museum. And people pay a lot of money to come and see it. And people paid a lot of money to get it in here. And you know, all this stuff. It's really important to me that money is not the benchmark that I have for my art, right? Because I think it's a different space.
Yeah.
For anyone. I mean, yes, we need money if it's going to be our livelihood, right? Money is great. It helps pay the bills. It helps take you to Europe, you know, whatever it is that you need it to do. Keeps you sheltered. But, kind of that brain trick of, but somebody else's art, would I be satisfied if that was mine? And then taking that and saying like, all right, well, I like this painting that's on my easel better than that one if it was on my easel. Wow, so what is my problem?
Yeah, it's that whole, you know, what is art and what is good and who gets to decide. And it turns out we do.
Yeah, we get to decide. Exactly.
Are we satisfied with our own work?
Exactly. And I was recently starting to teach my dad how to watercolor. And that's so much of the conversation. Like, my mom watercolors a lot, and she does these amazing, colorful, just delightful, impressionistic pieces. She does a lot of work with water and islands and stuff. And it's just amazing to see. And her color choices are like spot on, right? And just very expressive. And so then my dad is colorblind. And he's like, I'm not really a good drawer. Like, I don't, like, how am I going to, like, and then I'm going to look at your mom's and I'm going to feel sad about mine. I'm like, the point is that it's going to be yours.
Right.
There is going to be, yes, yours will not look like hers.
It'll be different.
It will be different, which is good, right? Yeah. We don't have your paintings in the world.
Right.
We want to see your paintings in the world.
Because what a unique perspective, right?
Exactly. Well, especially, I know, I'm so excited, and I really want him to keep painting because I want him to play around with, like, well, what if you just painted and you didn't care what the quote-unquote right color is, right? If you're colorblind, just paint what you think looks good. It's going to look odd to other people. But that's the delight, right? That's what's so interesting about your paintings versus somebody else's paintings.
Right. And it won't look odd to other colorblind people.
Well, that too. Or I was even saying, like, pick what, kind of like that, do something and mess it up first.
Yeah.
I was like, what if you just do something that's obviously the wrong color first?
Right, yeah.
Make the sky hot pink.
Yeah.
Now what do you do?
Love that.
You know, like, just kind of play with that
it.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Make the hill. I guess hills can be pretty much any color now that I'm thinking about it. 'Cause I'm like, they could be blue, they could be purple, they could be orange, they could be yellow.
That's the horticulture landscape designer in you, yes.
But, you know, just like do something that feels odd. And then what do the answers after that need? Which actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is a huge part of how I do that design. Once the clients, you know, landscapes, once the client says, okay, well, I don't like this or this or this, but I want this. Once I have those things slotted in, it's like, all right, how do we make everything else make sense around these things? And you just make it all fit that way.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. Incredible. And it's just really true that what you create is unique to you. It doesn't have to look like anybody else's. In fact, it probably shouldn't. It shouldn't look like anybody else's because it's your art. It's what you're doing. You don't have to feel like you've got to be anybody else.
Right. Taking somebody else's work that you really admire and enjoy and makes you happy and playing around with what does that feel like in your hands, feel like on your page, feel like with your clay, right?
Yeah.
That, I think, is also a really good practice.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of see where it's comfortable. But then it's that allowing it to be even then slightly different than what they're doing.
Right.
Because that's not doing it wrong.
Right.
It's just doing it the way yours would end up looking.
Well, and frankly, I want to go down a philosophical rabbit trail here.
There's a little bit.
There's the idea that, like, the philosophical question of, is there ever, if two things are identical, are they the same thing? Right? And it's like, I always say no because they're numerically distinct, even if they're identical in every other way.
Right.
And I just feel like when it comes to, there's something about the energetic stamp of every individual that it's naturally going to be just slightly different, even if you were trying to do line by line by line. And it should be. That should be embraced, I think, and not fought against.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess people could push back on that because there's people who do, like, miniatures that are like exact replicas and what have you, whatever.
But their miniature is not the larger sofa.
Oh, that's true. Numerically distinct.
It is still distinct.
Even if they're identical. Yeah. So all that to say, make your art be weird.
Yeah.
Embrace.
Make a mistake a quote unquote mistake at the beginning.
Yeah. Break the perfectionist chokehold by ruining it, quote unquote, on purpose. Yeah, it is real.
Yeah, it's so real.
Interestingly, I have only ever seen you grapple with this kind of rage with physical art for like painting and drawing.
Yeah.
Everything else is a real source of joy to you.
Yes.
With like your fiber arts and your design work and everything else, your garden work for sure just fills you up and there's so much joy. And you're like, I want to make this because it just needs to exist in the world. It's so cute and fabulous. She'll hand do new felt ornaments for a Christmas tree every year, and they're just delightful. It's only the painting and the drawing that induces this rate. Do you have any thoughts about why that is?
I think 2D ends up feeling really restrictive to me.
Yeah, I can't move it in the same way.
Right. You can't just, you put the clay blob. You can keep on working on that clay blob until it looks like how you want.
Right.
Technically, it's the same with paintings. But I think
you can hear her aggravation already.
but there's also so much to be said for the expectations I hold in my head is so much higher for an oil painting than it is for a felt butter stick. Like a felt butter stick ornament can look in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And people are going to be like, that's so cute.
Right.
Like you're going to get that from other people. And I get it from myself because it's adorable.
Right.
But if I am doing, there's just so much tradition and gravitas connected to an oil painting of a pomegranate.
That's true.
It's gonna, you really want to, or
be the Dutch master.
Right. Yeah. Or like my pencil sketches, I have to do them so fast before I get into the space. like if I set myself a time limit, it's like I only have 10 minutes for this. I like them so much better than if I'm like, I need to draw this teapot and it's going to take 7 hours. I'm never going to be satisfied with that teapot because it's never going to be what my brain expects it to look like, which is like photorealistic, which is not my discipline. That is just never going to be what I actually want to do with my time.
And you did not enjoy the process. She did do this teapot, listener.
Yes.
She did not enjoy the process.
The thing is, though, if somebody else, that is their discipline, I will 500% buy a graphite drawing of a teapot that's photorealistic. 2 seconds, I'm there, right? It's just so interesting to kind of work through, like, okay, well, why does my brain not like me doing this?
Yeah. It's interesting to delve into there. Yeah.
And it's just all based on expectation of what it expects me to be able to do. And what I actually can do.
Yeah.
Or it's how much time. Because I know I can get to all these things. I don't want to take that long.
Well, I do think there's something to that, leaving the space for the art to be what it wants to be. I think we were talking about that in Scribblers, too, when we brought up this very thing. The, like, rage of, like, oh, it isn't what I want it to be. And I think often in my creativity, what it becomes is sometimes something I couldn't even have imagined. And it happened completely by mistake, or more often than not, because of my limited skill set. You have to, like, work around the thing, and then you end up with something really cool, and you're like, hey, thanks, creativity.
Right.
Thanks for doing me a solid. So, you know, I guess the point is, if you're a perfectionist, just loosen up a little. Like let creativity see what it wants to be without putting that demand on it, maybe. You know, and if you feel full of rage, take a walk.
Yeah,
Don't destroy it. Don't destroy it. I've had
some water.
Lots of times where it's just like, especially with writing, I'm like, I am just writing I write professionally, you know, so we both have the kind of thing where we're using a creativity in the day job, and sometimes it's like, I am just writing garbage. And I want to set it on why everything coming out is just trash.
And
then I go back and read it. I'm like, that's not so bad, you know?
And with anything creative, it's really important to remember that there are drafts.
There are drafts, yeah.
And
it's editable.
You just need a big pile of lumpy clay in front of you. So that's what that first draft is, right? The first draft is just getting your material together.
Yeah.
And then you sculpt it, then you shift it, then you throw it into a pot.
You can't edit something that doesn't exist.
Right. Pretty much every artistic discipline has prep involved.
That's true. Yeah.
You wedge the clay, right? You get out all your oils because that takes forever. You mix all of your colors. It takes forever. You know, so like, is that...
You write your outline.
You write your outline. It takes forever. But allowing yourself, like, it's never going to be perfect ever, but it's also really not going to look nice in the beginning anyway.
It's not going to look nice in the beginning anyway, so just keep working on it.
That's part of it. It's not that you're doing it wrong.
Right. You're not a failure. It's just draft one.
Art with Taipei.
Well, Katie Sinclair, what is next for you?
What is next for me?
Yeah.
Today?
Creatively.
Well, making more landscapes, finding new weird things for my crew to build.
Yeah.
Love doing that. Been working with a lot of bent wood projects lately.
Cool.
We have a wood bender now, so thinking of all the crazy stuff that we can do.
They make a machine that just bends wood?
It's like a wood sauna.
Wow.
So
yeah.
Right? So it's just like this long box, and then it's there's a little, it's a wood sauna. So then they sit in there, and they get all bendy, and then you bend them and let them dry.
Best day of the wood's life, there. Just being
I know.
soaked.
I often get very jealous of the wood. We'll get there at the end of a long day to check in with the crew, and the wood's just chilling in its little sauna. And it's like,
little hot tub.
It was neat.
That's cool. I never thought about how that's done, but it's it's kind of like fire in the steel if you're a blacksmith. Like, you gotta make it malleable to bend it. That's cool.
Yeah, and then it stays there. Yeah. Wood, trees, also plant matter. Very interesting.
Yeah.
You do all kinds of stuff.
And any plans for your continued vision of creating creative space?
Oh, yeah. We're continuing with Scribblers. I've just really loved that space and finding out ways to make it even more accessible to more people. There are other art groups in the area that do very similar things.
Yeah.
But you can only have that real connection when you have a smaller number of people.
That's true.
And so just kind of figuring like, what's the best way for us to make this space for us?
Yeah.
And then we'd really love to do, like essentially show and tell, like a little gallery, maybe come, later in the year, 6 months or so, and, maybe invite people in the neighborhood, like, come on over, like,
take
there's
a
all
look.
this cool stuff we made. What do you think? And it's a way for us to celebrate ourselves. It's also a great way to, like, kick yourself in the butt and, like, oh, yeah, I need to actually make this thing.
Yeah.
It's not just that. It's
Deadlines
so
are
easy to just
crucial.
have things always off in the future and like, oh yeah, I'll do that someday. But this kind of gives that deadline of like, well, you got to hang it on the wall for the gallery.
So better get cracking. God, I know.
Make
I
it.
was in my last interview. We were talking about creative discipline and why it's so freaking hard to get started.
Deadlines.
Deadlines. Yep.
Deadlines.
Well, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I didn't have to twist her arm too hard, thankfully, and we had a lovely conversation. I enjoyed this very much. I'm still learning things about you, which is always fun. That's always nice. As it should be, indeed. So, and thank you for joining us today for the B-Town Breakdown. You can join us next week on Friday at 6 p.m. at 106.5 KQWZ LP FM, or watch playbacks podcast style on the Highline Heritage Museum's YouTube channel.
Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP FM, South King County.